Welcome to the Hard But Worth It podcast, where we explore the leader's journey. My name's Kirk.
And I'm Josh.
And wait, you're back?
Again, I'm sorry.
Mitch is out of town again, and so we've got Josh, and I'll bet you're going to be seeing a bit more of him in the future. I'm enjoying this time with you. Mitch, please come back.
Well, I want to know where he gets all these travel points that he gets to spend. How come I can't?
Fair. One of the things that I wanted to bring Josh in today for is he's had quite an experience over the time he's been an entrepreneur and in business with this idea of failure. Now, he's had plenty of successes as well, but I've watched him walk through failure numerous times. And over the time that we've been friends and done all these kinds of things we've done together, there's also been a lot of things written about fail forward and fail fast. And this word pivot has taken over the entrepreneurial space, and everybody's pivoting. But the question we want to explore today is, if we've learned how to fail well, why is it still so hard? So Josh, how long have we known each other? It's been 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, almost 10 years.
Along that journey, I've not only watched you walk your entrepreneurial journey, and you've watched me walk mine. We've also shared a bunch of stories back and forth, and your entrepreneurial goes back quite a ways. And over that time, I have experienced this notion of failure emerge as a real central theme that we taught a lot about. And we get words like fail fast and fail forward and all that kind of stuff.
Totally.
And those are really important concepts, and we don't want to lose track of them. They're really necessary. It's a fundamental part of being in this new economy that we're part of, where we have all these companies searching for new business models. And now that AI is coming on board, it appears as though we're going to go through a whole nother round of that. But you've been at this failure thing now, or success thing, whichever way you want to look at it, for a long time. You've had a bunch of experiences. And I want to get an understanding of what your current relationship is, or what your understanding is of this idea of failure at this point in your journey. Can you give us a little bit of, maybe start with a little bit of what you used to think about it, kind of where you came from, so that we can get into like what's your current understanding?
Yeah, I think what I used to think about it is, pain equaled failure. So anytime I experienced pain as an entrepreneur, I must have failed.
And there's some, maybe even a little bit of truth to that, right?
There is. And I think the human experience is all about pain. We're pain avoidance experts. And the entire, entirety of comfort and how we design our homes to our lives, and, temperature controlled environments in our vehicles and everything it has always been iterative to avoid some level of discomfort, which is another way of just saying, minor to extreme pain. So whatever that is. And so, I think that it's just in our nature to try and avoid pain, and pain equals failure. And the more disposable income you have, the less the less pain that you have.
Right.
And to some degree that's true, but as you kind of look at it at a higher level, we find that that's actually not true. It doesn't mean you're actually happier. We have those studies now. It doesn't mean that you actually have better relationships.
The kind of pain you experience moves.
Yes.
It does shift the way you experience pain.
Yes. Right? Yes, it does.
That's true. But some would say it's more painful at times.
Yes.
Right.
And where you experience pain it changes. But it's actually, now being an entrepreneur for, I would say it's 15 plus years, and
almost your entire career.
Yes.
You went from barista to entrepreneur.
True. That is true.
Massive promotion in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, without the barista, I think that I would have had a harder launch pad, but that's a great launch pad for those of you out there. But I was trying to build plans that would avoid that pain. Yeah. Trying to build stories in my head that would give me enough dopamine when I thought about them to help me be naive enough and crazy enough to go after an idea that was recession-proof, perfect. I've thought about everything. There's no way this could fail.
Love that line.
All these kinds of things. Yeah. And I did believe that there was a way to avoid, certain types of pain. And that is true. But I think now, 15 years later, that it's not my relationship with Failure was also 10 years ago, even maybe 5 years ago. Failure was interwoven with my being, not just my doing. So what
do you mean by that? Break that down just a little bit for us.
Well, me as a man, me as Josh, was my failure was a direct reflection, or any pain that I experienced was a direct reflection of my being, of who I was, my identity, my deepest core, which some might say or define as your spirit or other things like that. And I had that so deeply interwoven. It's why the stress of trying to avoid failure would create sleepless nights, and because your reputation and your identity and everything is associated with your doing, and it's so interwoven. And I was afraid of it. I'm deeply afraid of it.
In our coaching methodology, we often, well, not ours, this is often the case in a lot of coaching methodologies. We're helping people differentiate that. Because the way we say this is, you can never fail at being you. You are you. Like, that's done. But it becomes necessary for growth to learn how to fail at doing you.
Yeah.
And that distinction is what I hear you
talking
about.
And I do like the progression of seeing those things separated, of being able to say, it's okay. I'm going to experience pain in all the things that I do. My relationship with failure is that it's like a shadow. It's the Peter Pan shadow. It's there. I'm frustrated by it. I want to eliminate it. I want to try and hide it. I want to try and, and I love what Barry was trying to do in that story. And it's a great imagery of something. It will always be there. You can't avoid it. But you can decide how you treat it, relate to it, and do something with it. And sometimes it just is. Just sit in that. Sit in that. If I just sit and I reflect, sometimes the failure or the pain just is. Sometimes I can learn from it. Sometimes I can't.
Right.
Sometimes I can actually next time try and avoid it. Sometimes I can iterate from it. And actually, the failure is like, thank you. Oh, right. I'm glad that's a no. I won't spend more money going down that path. Let's go try this instead. And in entrepreneurship, you want to do that. Fail fast, fail cheap. That was what they were trying to say, is iterate quickly. Don't prolong or elongate this process.
Don't avoid the learning.
Correct.
Right? If you're never willing to fail, let's start with this. Do you agree that failure is not only necessary, it's unavoidable?
Yes.
Okay, so there's no way, there's no path to avoiding failure.
Right.
You can create an insulated world and try your hardest, and you're still going to run into it.
Yeah. Right?
Okay. So then I think the fail fast, fail forward framework is all about learn from your failures as fast as you can. And so many of us being pain avoidant are prolonging that.
Right.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's been the biggest change in my relationship with failure, is that I'm okay with it being there. I am, and it almost feels like there is multiple types of failure. In a way, it's not just one singular failure. There are types of pain that exist. A bee sting is different than cancer.
Yeah.
Or something chronic, like a cold or something. It's like there are types of pain that's like, oh, this is different.
I can handle this one.
Yeah.
I can't handle that one.
Yeah.
Or I don't know how to handle it yet.
Yeah, and some pain is because I love sports personally. I play sports actively, and when I roll my ankle, like I did last May, I rolled my ankle playing baseball. I play fast pitch baseball, and I was stealing second, and I rolled it on the outside when I went to push off to steal. The ground was really hard. I won't talk about the field maintenance or anything like that, but we did. But my cleat didn't get in. And so my ankle rolled.
Yeah.
I didn't go, baseball sucks.
Right.
I hate this game, because I went, this is part of the game.
It is.
And this is, I want to keep playing, so I want to get better so I can play again. And, being 40, maybe I'll steal less. I don't know. Maybe I'll change a few.
Well,
things.
That's actually an interesting part of that analogy or that metaphor is eventually the fact that that kind of failure, that kind of pain is part of the game, is what's going to make you stop.
Yeah.
You will eventually succumb.
Yeah.
At some point in your 90s, right?
No, it'll probably, yes.
But at some point you're like, okay, I'm no longer capable of doing this. The failure wins.
Yeah.
Right.
I hate the reality of what you just said.
Right.
Absolutely hate it. And I think that others who are listening to this probably do too. Right. It hurts my soul.
Right. Don't want to admit that.
No.
In fact, but I'll do everything I can to avoid it. And some of those things are worth doing. So staying in shape and stretching and building muscle mass and doing like there's a lot of things you can do that will prolong that for a bit.
For a bit.
You might get it, but it's less than a decade, probably.
I hate that what you're saying is that one day we'll all die.
So that raises one of the central things that I think we need to talk about in this failure conversation. And it's the death word. But before we get to that, I want to play with the pivot word. So give everybody a chance to recover from the death conversation.
Okay.
And if you're still with us in a few minutes, we'll have that one. But the pivot idea, one of the things that comes out of failure is this idea that it's data and learning, which is what we're talking about. And a lot of it is. And so we got this idea in our mind that there's this pivot, right? You're pivoting, you're learning, you're growing, you're doing. And as long as you're pivoting, you're good, right? And to me, it's still the pursuit of safety and security. It's still the pursuit of success at all cost. Because when we didn't know that we needed to fail, and then we started to learn about failure, like, oh, great, this is awesome. I'm going to learn how to fail, and now I'm just going to pivot like crazy until I succeed. But I've watched all kinds of people pivot which is basically they're just going in circles. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm not sure you're pivoting. I think you took 4 right turns in a row, and you're right back where you started. And yes, you may have changed something, but you didn't learn anything.
Right.
And the phrase was always pivot or persevere. That's the other part of it. Sometimes in the midst of pain, you don't step out of it. You don't get away from it. You go through it. And lots of personal development teachers will tell you that the only way out is through.
Right.
And we're trying to sell the pivot all the time. And we celebrate this idea. And I don't hear people talking about persevere. I hear the pivot. And one of the things I liked when we were talking about this idea of setting up the podcast, you talked about how failure, and I hadn't thought of it this way, which is why it really rung a bell for me, is failure was a difficult conversation to have because it is a difficult conversation. It's a deep, hard conversation. Mm-hmm. And so in the entrepreneurial community, which I often think as being primarily motivated by success, which is fine. We want businesses to win and succeed. But it was almost like this failure conversation was a bit too much. And so we reframed it as pivoting.
Yep.
And now the pivot is our new word for failure. But that's not right. It's pivot or persevere, which puts the pain back on the table.
Right.
And I think we struggle to actually dialogue about that well.
Right. I think that's right. We're back in, I think it was probably 13 years ago, I started a kind of a startup community, meetup group that met monthly in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we did this series once a month that we called Failing Upward or Failing Up. Fail Up. Mm-hmm. I think it was just Fail Up. I can't remember. It was so long ago. And I remember there was this one entrepreneur that I invited, and they wanted to come, but they end up canceling on me. And it was and the reason why I wanted to tell their story is because they raised capital with one idea. Mm. That idea failed, but in the midst of the failure, actually changed the idea, and the customer actually had a paying customer, and completely shifted and had an entirely open business model that they were going after. And it looked like the original investment and what they bought in was dead, but this entrepreneur made something come to life out of it. And I was like, I want to tell that story. I want people to know.
It's a great story.
And it was pretty phenomenal. And then because I named it Fail Up, they didn't want their name associated with that word.
Yeah.
And this was pre-pivot.
Okay.
So if at that time I had the word pivot.
Yeah. Pivot on.
it would have been fine. The guy would have come, he would have told his story, and we used the word pivot, and it would be fine. So I think the invention of that word was because I think that we're uncomfortable with the word itself. We're uncomfortable, like you said, like we're uncomfortable with death. Mm-hmm. Something had to die for that to come to life. Mm-hmm. I think about the forest burning, and how the acorn on a tree, or the pine, the
pine cones,
the pine cone,
right?
Not the acorn, sorry, the pine cone.
Yeah.
At certain temperatures, at extreme high temperatures, actually go inside out, spreading seed throughout the forest. And I think that's an incredible, the forest isn't crying as much as we are in that moment, because all this new life is being spread about. Does it take time? Yes. All those things. So there's benefits to death, that are brought about, but we have a hard time with it because it sucks. It still sucks. The fire that came through our city in 2018 left the western ridge of our mountains on the Trinity side, completely barren. And now we're seeing bush and things like that, but the trees are not there yet.
Right.
And there's going to be in our lifetime may not ever be where they were. Right. And so death does hurt for a time. But in the grand scheme of things, like it doesn't. And I think that's something we have to be able to, push through, is realize the presence of it will be there.
Right.
We'll experience it over and over and over again, and that's okay.
It's okay. There's a writer that I really like, and he says he has a chapter on necessary suffering. This is in a Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upwards. And he said there, and in it, to quote, I think I'm quoting, I might be paraphrasing, but he says, there is a suffering that is necessary. There's a suffering that isn't necessary. Mm-hmm. So that seems right. Although some people are like, are you sure there's a suffering that's necessary? Well, he says there is. But then he says this, 90% of the suffering in the world is unnecessary. 10% of it is necessary. Now, he hasn't done math. That's not a scientific statement. It's a statement for effect, because this is the line that matters. He says the 90% is caused by us trying to avoid the 10%. Mm. That idea to me is profound, because the necessary suffering, the hardship that we face, it's where so much of who we are is made. And I wouldn't be who I am today without it. But some of that suffering is unknowable what it's actually for precisely. It's very difficult to say that I know what it means, right?
Right.
Some suffering, some hardship you walk through, you can go, no, I understand what that was for. I know what I learned. You can do the math on it. Yeah. And that's great. But there's things, the most profound suffering I think we face as humans, we look at it and we're like, if I'm being honest, I don't know that it had some grand purpose or meaning. I wouldn't wish it on my enemy, but I know I wouldn't be who I am today without it.
Yeah.
So there's some value statement there.
Well, I like you think about the last 25 years of technological innovation. Mm-hmm. What we had with landlines was reliability,
yeah,
but not mobility.
Correct. What
we gained with mobility was less reliability, and we want both.
We do.
We want it all. And it seems like every time we add technology, it creates new problems, and we're frustrated by that. And it's almost like we acted like as if there would be no new problems.
Yeah. It was going to solve all my problems.
Well, for instance, at one time, we were using fax machines.
I remember that.
To, send purchase orders.
Basically email each other.
Yes. Now we email, and there's a spam folder. Oh, did it get in your spam folder? Did you lose it?
Yeah.
Or did that not get through?
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to send it. Let me, and we have now we have email problems, and now we're texting.
Correct.
Okay, great. So we're using, new all the, and every time we add the ability to communicate quicker, more easily, now we're frustrated that you didn't get back to me soon.
Quicker and more easily.
Quicker and more easily. And it's just.
I was just talking to someone this morning who has become famous, right? Mm-hmm. So she's now famous, and she has all these offers, and a movie just came out about her, and all this stuff is happening, and it's coming to her through direct messaging on Instagram, where she has thousands and thousands and thousands, and it's just overwhelming, because because so many people can access her directly now.
Right.
And so there's an axiom of life that I'm quite fond of that says a person's ability, and then you can insert different words here, but in this case, it's a person's ability, your ability to communicate with me far exceeds my responsibility to respond.
Right.
But when communication was limited and precious, we didn't need that rule.
Right.
Right. But in today's world, it's like, you can't respond to everybody just because they DM'd you.
Right.
It's not possible.
Right.
But it's a new reality, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think that every time we try, and all of those things were in a way of trying to create the kind of the luxury of solving a previous problem, a previous pain that we had. Because what is every startup? It's like you start with a problem statement.
Totally.
I want to solve the problem of, so my idea, so we did startup games.
Yeah.
We call it startup weekend, startup games.
Yeah.
And what do? Pitch night. You have about 60 people that get up and say, hey, haven't you ever experienced this problem? And, what we're going to do is we're going to create this solution that solves this problem. We're going to call it this, and we need this, and we're going to build this, and it's going to do this, and this is our business model, and it's what everything. That's every business in the world.
That's entrepreneurship in 60 seconds.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
And so it's all about solving pain of some that someone is experiencing. Right. And actually, you don't really have a business without solving pain. Value. Your value proposition in the world has to solve someone's pain, or it's nothing.
Games, right?
Yeah.
And however, the thing that is so incredible about that is we have this idea in that notion that we can solve all the pain.
Right.
Like if we know we haven't, we know it's going to be a long time, but really embedded in that, if we work hard enough and apply enough technology to it, we will solve all the problems.
Oh, we won't?
What? Well...
It sounded sarcastic at the end there, and I hate that.
No, we will not solve that. It's like,
okay.
It's embedded in like what some people think that given enough time we can know everything.
Right.
I don't think that's true. Is everything knowable? Don't think it is. Is everything problem solvable? Nope, don't think it is. And I think if we ever got to the spot where we solved every problem and knew everything, we'd also be profoundly bored.
Right.
And the whole point of living would go away.
Right.
Because there's a reality that part of that failure, part of that struggle is a necessary component of what makes life worth living.
Yeah.
We actually don't want to solve it all, right?
Right.
And fortunately we cannot. So, but we live in this idea that we can arrive in this place where we will finally be happy, where everything will work, where we'll be at peace and there'll be no more conflict. And it's like, nope.
Yeah.
I remember in the church world, I'm being a bit overly black and white, but there would be these theological questions, and they're answering, and they're wrestling through in the ladies' Bible study, and finally somebody would say, "I can't wait to get to heaven where all my questions will be answered." And I would quietly inside myself say, "That's hell."
Yeah.
And I don't want to go there.
Right.
Because we have this idea that there will finally be a day when all this stuff will come together.
Right.
And I think we hold that around this failure idea.
Yeah.
Can we learn enough about failure that it will be a solution?
Right.
And the answer to that is yes, there are things you can learn about failure that are solutions. Like you can learn how to not do that again.
Yeah.
And in fact, some people have already learned how to not do that again, and you should go learn from them.
Right.
Like there's collective failure learning, right? But there's also failure that just happens. I would put in the frame of chaos or randomness, where it's very, very difficult to extract meaning from it.
Yeah.
Because you didn't do anything wrong. No one else did anything wrong. There was an earthquake. And it all crashed. It fell apart. There was an event that took place that was out of everybody's control, and you can't control those things. And if you have to learn something from that, right? The learning that just happens.
Yeah.
To try to attach meaning to it is a mistake. There's also failures that take you out of the game, where you don't come back. You pivot so hard, you leave the game. And I think what people mean by pivot in the held poorly is they mean they learn from it to stay in the game to finally win. Pivots that cause us to win are what we're excited about.
Right.
But there are pivots that cause people to leave the game and never come back. The restaurateur who has been working in the restaurants as a chef their whole life and wants to open their own place and worked 20, 30 years to collect enough money, and they put their life savings into opening up a restaurant, and it turns out they're a great chef, but a terrible business owner. and they lose everything. That was their passion. That was their dream. They're done. It's going to take another 20 or 30 years to get their cash back together. No, they're not coming back into the game. What they learned is they have to leave.
Yeah.
And there are deaths like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can say you learned something. You learned you shouldn't play that game. But those pivots are epic, man.
I think it would be, since it's such a central part of, I think what influences us a lot, I'm going to bring this up and see if you want to talk about this a little bit, because the Judeo-Christian story is influences a lot of our culture, the way our governments are structured, the way our businesses run, our optimism for things, our up and to the right, types of belief patterns. And I look at it, and when I see the macro view of kind of the biblical story of God and what happened in that story, I see the Judeo-Christian God is okay with failure over and over and over again, even presently, if you think that you're in the church era, right? So if you're over here, the Garden of Eden story, the poetry that's in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, all the way through to, Moses, then into the kings and the judges and the prophets and all the failures over and over and over again. You insert Christ, and then Christ is like, I'm going to hand it back over to you. And now, here we are, the church. And how much failure is just interwoven into that story.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere, and it almost seems like
it's not super relevant.
Right.
I love this subject because it is foundational to so much of how we think. And I think we tell this story. I think we miss this element. We have turned it into a success story, and then we need heaven to be a place that's perfect. And I would argue perfect not only doesn't exist, it's as a result of that, it's probably evil. And we can do another podcast on that. But this pursuit of perfection is just mind-numbingly ridiculous. You cannot find it in the world. Point to something. Even math, which is one of the most elegant languages we have that is so explanatory of so many things, has a contradiction at the bottom of it. It doesn't work out in the end. So in that story, you've got the Torah, which is the first 5 books and it's the Jewish, it's the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which is the Jewish story. There's a bunch of people in there, we call them the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And usually our patriarchs and matriarchs are heroes, and they're amazing. But in this story, they're all pretty corrupt and terrible, and they screw most of it up.
Right.
And that's actually the story. The story is not that Abraham was amazing. The story is that he was just as much an idiot as the rest of us.
Right.
Basically. He did learn along the way, so that's cool. And then his kids did the same thing, and his kids did the same thing, and their kids did the same thing over and over and over. But even in the Christ story, this whole notion of God comes to earth, right? Why? To die.
Right.
To die. Yep. So one of the fascinating things...
Which was really difficult for his followers to
accept,
comprehend and accept.
That's not what God does.
Right.
So
he rules. He's got to take over everything.
All-powerful. Right. So one of the fascinating things about this story is that in this story, there is a God who also dies. So God abandons God, and then God dies. It's that embedded in it. And I think we gloss over that thing.
Yeah.
And a few years, in most places, if you in the Christian calendar, there's the Easter season, and during the Easter season, you have Palm Sunday, which is the Sunday before Easter, and Easter is the resurrection day. It's the good news day. It's the happy day. Everyone celebrates Easter. So you have Palm Sunday, and that's a triumphal entry, and it's this big grand thing, and we miss the metaphor there, of course. And then there's this thing called Good Friday, and that's the day that God died. And on Good Friday, we call it good, right? That's a retroactive understanding. The present tense, they would have called that Awful Friday. Hellish Friday.
Terrible.
But we call it Good Friday. So that's pretty of us. And then if you go to most Good Friday services, they're pre-Easter services, right? But if you sit in a proper Good Friday service, it's a hellish experience. It's uncomfortable. It's terrible. It's meant to disrupt you because on that day, God died. And the idea that God rose back again on the 3 days later, you don't know that yet.
Yeah.
And we suck at telling this story because I think you're right. I think the failure notion is just littered throughout this. And it's often, sometimes it's failures with a purpose.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's meaning structures that come out of it. Sometimes it's just a mess.
Yeah. Well, if we stay on that theme, you look at God created, right? And then the humans were part of that creation. I think there's a good chance that was an inevitable failure was in the creation, most likely.
It was a freaking serpent in the garden.
Yes,
it's in the story.
But I do think that if you believe this story that you are made in the image of God, then you're a creator as well. I think that's part of our nature. And so, what is creation? I think it's the act. Creativity is problem solving. There's a guy that really influenced me. He's an old friend from Cincinnati who is a thought leader in this space and in the creativity space. His name's Todd Henry. And he's the one that taught me and just showed me just how much creativity is actually not based on what you do. It's not art per se. It's actually anyone who solves problems. And solving problems sometimes there are problems that are just, we won't solve in our lifetime. They just are. And like you talked about, not every problem is gonna have a bow at the end. Not all of them are gonna be Hallmark movies. Thank God.
We don't know what we think about Hallmark movies.
Yeah,
They're
and
silly,
there's
right?
just lack of depth because there's no reality in the story.
Right.
The reality of our life and our story, the inevitability of the problems and pain that we experience is actually what makes the story deep. And sometimes there's no it's hard to find the redemption in it, in like to go up and to the right and to find the pivot that's going to, make everything beautiful. But without that, like, life feels meaningless. It doesn't have the depth of meaning that we all actually want. We just don't know how to say we want it when we're 30 years old or 25 years old and we're starting, that new business. We don't know how to say, hey, what I'm actually pursuing is meaning in my life. And actually, in order to get meaning, I have to acknowledge that shadow is there and it will be there.
Yep.
Am I still the pan? Am I still the Peter the Pan that's going to take on hook? Yes, that is true. But that shadow is there, and I hate it.
Yep.
But it's there.
Yep. There is a divergence. I want to be able to draw right now really bad, and I can't. But there's this idea that as we're going through life, and we do make upward motion. It is good to make up into the right motion, to grow, to learn. There's a certain amount of that that's just almost even necessary in life. And but as we do, we hit these spots where we have these drops, right? We fall, and you start to see that there's this up motion, but there's also a down motion that's going on. And we learn something in the down that causes us to find new energy to start going up again, right? But I think eventually those drops keep happening and we start to recognize, oh, wait a minute. Every time I go deeper, I find something that gives me more of something I want in the world. And then I think we also start to recognize, and that's not always just money. The measure of success starts to get fuzzy for us. And if we'll let go right there, we'll recognize that the meaning, the depth, and I would say the wisdom that we're able to carry does go up and to the right if we continue to let these drops happen. And then eventually, I think there's a spot at which we just go deep.
Yeah.
It's this victory through surrender notion and all this non-dualistic language that you can never make sense of. But we just finally go deep. And in the process of that, we actually go up. But it's not the metrics of money, wealth, well, those are the same thing, of wealth, fame, power, and honor. Those ones kind of, you can still have them. Yeah. But they're not the point anymore.
Right.
And I think there's a way in which, and this is where this gets kind of sticky and hard to unravel, right? It's especially in the length of one episode. But there's a way in which failure becomes just depth.
Right.
Maybe. And it becomes a necessary part of wisdom. And I don't think we have to go looking for it.
Yeah.
That gets messy. But it's always there.
Yeah. Well, the failure that there is failure that I uninvite to my party now, though. And
say more about that.
Yeah, because there's failure that I know is always going to exist, because if I choose into who I am, and I wake up and I want to do the work that's meaningful to me, I'm choosing to also have the failure that comes with that. There is failure, though, that I don't invite to the party anymore. And that is that is, for instance, it's a ritual of mine yearly to unravel myself from previous commitments that took up time, that meant something for a season, but now I need to make room for new things. So it might be a group I'm a part of, or a meeting that was a kind of a recurring patterns or things like that. Just any commitment is anything that, hey, just reevaluating, is this still something that is necessary, is meaningful, is something I want to give my time to? And it's a time to kill something in a good way. Like, say, hey, that was for a time, and this is, and it's helpful.
Allow it to fail.
Allow it to fail. If I kept saying yes
Yeah.
to the thing that actually didn't fit anymore, that is a failure. That is a failure that that I allowed in, that didn't.
And I don't invite it.
I don't. I
that.
can't. And let me frame it as I want to say that is that would be a deeper failure that I don't want to experience anymore. It is a failure that I am avoiding, and I'm intentionally avoiding. Not all failure. I think there are types of failures, and not all failures should be invited anymore. And there are some that I know are unavoidable, and there's those that are avoidable. And when I invite the ones that are avoidable to the table over and over again,
you're an idiot.
You are an idiot. Yes, and
you haven't learned, we'll say.
Yes, and I've done that, and I look back at myself and say, Josh, you're an idiot. The reason why you're feeling this stress right now and this pain is because you filled your schedule with things that actually aren't fitting with who you are, what you're doing right now, and what is helpful.
And they did in the past, maybe.
They did in the past. Absolutely did in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
There is. I think of this. So at the bottom of this question to me is our relationship to death. The reason that we don't like pain and the reason we don't like failure is because it reminds us of death. It pings the ultimate thing that and I think the human is fundamentally afraid of death, because on the other side of death, it's 100% speculation. Right. We just, and it's either the end of existence, which is the end of me, and I don't want that to happen. It's a survival instinct, or death is an experience, and we don't know which it is. Great. So then anything that pings that, any little death along the way, reminds us of that, so we're afraid of it. We don't like that. But I think one of the things that wise people learn through life is that there is a death that brings life.
Yes.
Death is embedded in everything. Death is part of the process.
And sometimes I kill things before I know what I would need to make room for.
Yeah, but we're
welcoming
new life.
But we're welcoming, and it's sometimes you're making margin for new things. You're giving room for something else to grow.
There's also a death that brings more death, right? And so there's a way of dying that causes us to become more dead in the process. And to me, that's in the lived experience, just why we think there's a heaven and a hell. If in the lived experience there's a death that brings life, maybe that's true after the ultimate death. And if in the lived experience there's a death that brings more death, maybe that's true after, but we don't know, so fine, we'll leave that for another podcast. But I think it's why those ideas form, because it's so profoundly true in this experience. And failure is like that as well.
Yeah. There's
a failure that brings life, and there's a failure that brings death. There's a persevering through pain that brings life. But even that can be held in a way where if I could just figure that out, then I get to succeed. And I just don't think that's how it works.
Yeah.
I think that there's a sense of, and I don't get to figure all that out.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and that's just part of our human experience, and I think we will never stop trying to avoid death.
I don't think so.
And it's why we have
it is hardwired.
That's why we have healthcare. That's why we have pharmaceutical medicine. It's
And at the same time, good luck with that.
Yeah, right.
One of the lines I like to deliver in some settings, especially when I'm getting a lot of pushback on these kinds of ideas, is I'll say, "Oh, right, but you forgot something." So I'm in a workshop and people are really trying to lock into success, and there's always a way to win, and I'm like, "Hang on a second, you forgot something." And I'll say, "The universe doesn't care about you. It's trying to kill you. It will succeed." And often people go, "Well, that's dark." And I'll respond, "No, that's 3 facts in a row. You made it dark." I think when we can accept those 3 facts in a row, we lose the "I deserve," "I'm entitled to." We lose the "it should be easy." We lose all that stuff goes away, and we're able to live more profoundly in reality as it is. And from that place, I think we can make extraordinary meaning out of life. But if you think that there's no death coming, you're fundamentally off base.
Yeah.
And it's going to affect your lived experience. It's not dark. It's light to me.
Let me ask you this.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of people that are watching this podcast are raising kids right now. How would you, knowing what you know now, going back to when your sons were little, how might you have taught them, maybe you did teach them this way, but how might you have shown them how to deal with or experience or relate to failure differently? Or just at all?
Yeah, it's one of those. I can tell you how I have learned in the context of raising kids, how I think about it retroactively. I don't know that I think I did some of this, and I don't know that I could have. It's retroactive knowledge, right? But it's also built in. I think raising kids, even remotely close to well, right? You don't have to be good at raising kids, and I think you still get this part right, is without realizing it. Or we'll say most parents are trying to protect their children. They think it's their job to protect their children. And yet, most parents are consistently introducing their kids to harm in age-appropriate ways. When they do it in not age-appropriate ways, we get really grumpy at them. We call that bad parenting. But when they don't do it at all, it's hard to find a parent that doesn't do it at all. Because you go from little socks you put on their feet because they don't walk. They just cute little socks, right? And then one day you put shoes on them because they're going to start learning to walk. But walking's dangerous, and they start falling. The first act of learning to walk, that moment, hey, they took their first steps. It's not walking. It's a controlled fall into my arms. Like they totally suck at walking. Yeah. But we still let them do it because they kind of won't be stopped, right? Then we go, okay, they have these cute little Velcro shoes. Let's do laces now. And then they start tripping over their laces because now they're learning to run. They get skin knees. And then they get all that figured out, and they're finally like, okay, they can walk and run. And then we introduce them to a bike. Yeah. What a idiotic thing to do if our job is to keep them safe. Yeah, then we let them ride in the street, blah, 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 blah. And it just goes on and on and on. In fact, I would suggest that...
Until they're driving.
And then we finally get them to a spot where we're like, okay, hope you're ready. Right. Goodbye. Right. Yeah. It's a never-ending process of increasingly introducing them to danger. And I would say birth is the beginning of it. A baby in utero is as safe as it will ever be. And then suddenly, without anyone's permission, pain and blood. Yeah. And we kick them out. I think we've been kicking kids out from the day they're born. And great parents just continue to, parents of any stripe kind of continue to do that. The challenge we have is we're always about 1.5 years late on some of those things, right? We do try to keep them a little bit too safe. Yeah. But I think if we can think about parenting through that lens, we begin to realize, it's not at all our job to keep our kids safe. It's our job to introduce them to danger in age-appropriate ways. Yeah. Right.
I like that.
And that notion framed a lot of how, and I remember when my oldest son was getting his driver's license, and you're scared. I was. Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. It's a big deal. And I thought to myself, do I trust him? And I didn't really have an answer to that because the answer is no. He's a 16-year-old. Right. I don't trust him. And then I thought, wait a minute. That's the wrong question because I'm comparing him to me. Do I trust him more or the same or more than I would have trusted myself at 16? I'm like, oh, yeah, he's actually a lot more trustworthy than I was. Right. Oh, yeah, of course he can have keys. And it might kill him. Yeah. Right. So that notion has become really important to how I think about that. And I started thinking that way at some point along.
And the thing is, facing the dangers that you feel you need to introduce to a child, or you need to introduce to your business, in order to be like the bravery it takes to face failure, or to experience it at all, is, that it just is, it's so scary.
It is.
And there's so many things that go through your head. If failure is inevitable, or if the worst thing that I can think of were to occur, that's the pain we're all trying to avoid. But then also on the flip side, if they never get their license, or if we never pursue this business segment, if we don't go after that, also they won't be able to grow into who they are, to be able to travel, to be able to go to a job, which actually might then open this door and do this. Yep. The level of risk is necessary, but also very scary. Yep. Because of what could occur, what could happen, like some tragedy, right? Could happen.
And those things really happen. Teenagers really die.
Yeah.
Because they make bad decisions, right?
Right.
Yeah. We could continue to unpack this for a very long time, because I think this is one we're dipping into some of the deeper subjects of life, right? And I think one of the things that I wanted to explore here today was it is good to have your first awareness that failure is a thing, and it's a subject you need to pay attention to. I think what happens though is our first attempt at that is to really turn it into a mechanism through which we can succeed. Right? It becomes there's a valley of sorrows and I have to go through it. Mm-hmm. And there is a valley of sorrows and you do have to enter it. But failure is a deeper subject than that.
Yeah.
It isn't one of the unanswerable questions. It cannot be formalized into a strategy for success.
Right.
Although if you don't understand it, you're going to struggle to succeed at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lesson that we can learn from that takes a decade or so, right, of playing with this idea. And as we age and become more sophisticated in our thinking around a subject like failure, I think we have the opportunity to become extraordinary entrepreneurs. And I think it's why the average age of a successful entrepreneur is actually 45. And I think we often think it's young, because we elevate the examples of the 27-year-old that hit it. But that's the anomaly by far, because entrepreneurship is a full contact sport.
Right.
It's really intense at times, and the further you go, the more intense it gets. The higher the stakes are, is all I mean by that. Mm-hmm. And these are subjects that we have to learn how to hold really, really well.
Yep.
And it's deeper than just a formula, because as we like to say around here, at the end, it's hard but worth it, or hard but not worth it. But with the failure subject, I think it's sometimes and that's hard.